So, what will we talk about today? I'll provide a very short introduction about cyclodextrins. Maybe we have a few new listeners. Then we'll um, talk a bit about how to make a cyclodextrin complex. Why is it important to make the complex properly? Focusing on oral formulations, of course. Then we'll see. What are the bottlenecks of developing oral formulations with cyclodextrins? What are the parts that you should put extra emphasis on? I'll share a few aspects of safety issues, safety questions, and potential side effects of cyclodextrins and oral formulations. And at the end, I'll share uh, the range of products that are on the market, discussing the importance and peculiarities of the various formulations. So, let's start with the general consideration part. So, the cyclodextrin is, as you may know, is an oligo sugar that has a shape of a ring or a donut with an inner cavity that is capable of encapsulating an active ingredient, typically hydrophobic small molecules, into its cavity. And upon encapsulation, as long as the active ingredient is within the cyclodextrin cavity, we can observe a lot of advantageous improvements like masking the taste, masking the smell of an ingredient, in some cases, reducing irritation and toxicity or interactions with other compounds. But more importantly, we can observe an increase in solubility, stability, and bioavailability. I added a few interactive parts into the conversation just so that you to keep you active during this talk. So I think we'll have three of these. The first of them, can you guess in the chat box how many cyclodextrins are there currently used in pharmaceutical products? Okay, we have a nine. Any other guess? Nine, five. I'm not really waiting for long with these answers. 20. Okay. Six, three, three. So let's see. Uh, the correct answer is nine, indeed. So there are seven cyclodextrins which are used as excipients in pharmaceutical formulations for small molecules. Obviously, these are the ones that we'll talk about today. There is one additional cyclodextrin that's used in vaccines as a vaccine adjuvant. That will not be the the topic of the talk, and there is one, the sugammadex, which is used as an active ingredient. Yes, as an active ingredient. So nine is the correct answer. So, in this figure, you can see eight of the nine cyclodextrins. So, the first seven are the ones that are used or approved as excipients in pharmaceutical formulations, and the sulfolipocyclodextrin is the one which is used in vaccines. When we take a look, and of course, if you're serious with the development, you want to know which cyclodextrins are represented in pharmacopoeias. As you can see, these would be the native cyclodextrins, alpha, beta, and the gamma, the hydroxypropyl beta, and the sulfabutyl beta. Two additional cyclodextrins which are approved in pharmaceutical formulations, the methylated beta and the hydroxypropyl gamma, are not represented in any pharmacopoeias, nor are they approved for oral formulations, so these will not be discussed today. When we look at the distribution of products with respect to administration routes, we can see that most of the products that are approved are for oral administration. So we'll have a large pool to pick from today. Um, you can also see that the beta cyclodextrin, so the cheapest, the most common one, has the most products present on the market. This rather has historical reasons a bit. So these products, the majority of these products have been developed years or in some cases decades ago. Nowadays, the development focuses much more on these two derivatives, the hydroxypropyl beta and the sulfabutyl beta cyclodextrin. The slide is not entirely correct because with the sulfabutyl, there is already one oral product on the market, and the second one is about to uh, come soon. So this is the main administration route, the main application of cyclodextrins in the pharmaceutical industry. So what kind of uses are there? I mentioned that cyclodextrins can be used for a lot of different purposes in our formulations. The main purpose usually is solubilization, but what is there beyond solubilization? So they can be used with taste masking. I have a slide specified for this one because it's not as easy to understand and it has some limitations if you want to use them for taste masking. For some highly potent APIs beyond the solubilization and improving bioavailability, they can also ensure content uniformity. Due to the nature of the complexation process and the dissociation of the complex, cyclodextrin can provide a really fast onset in the activity of the active ingredient. So they are especially ideal for fast dispersion, ODT formulations, active ingredients where you need a quick, immediate effect, like painkillers and actives like that. Uh, they can be used to chemical stabilization. In oral formulations, this is a bit more rare, and I'll also explain why it's more rare with oral formulations. And they can also be used for life cycle management in some cases, although, again, this may be a limitation for orals. We'll discuss that on the slides that's specific for limitations. So why would we use cyclodextrins at all? What is the improvement we can gain? Okay, solubility increase. Here you can see that to dissolve 10 milligrams of alpha-oxalone in water, you would need about 10 liters of the media, and in a cyclodextrin containing solution, below 1 milliliter would be enough, which is around a 10,000-fold improvement in the solubility. They can also help to improve the permeation. So not just a solubilizing effect, but a permeation enhancing effect. About this one, again, it's very critical to understand what is possible and what is not possible in the field of oral formulation. So I have a specific slide for that. But for now, let's just say that they can, under certain circumstances, improve the permeation, as it can be seen and with this nasal glucagon spray. And they can improve the stability of certain compounds, the oral solution of itraconazole, and the significantly improved shelf life of the product is a good example for that one. So, enhancing memory permeation. Why I picked two particular applications, the permeation enhancing effect and the taste masking effect, and explaining those two in more detail was because these are a bit more difficult to understand, and these are recurring questions in our conversations with companies who are developing cyclodextrins. Mm. So, how cyclodextrins can enhance permeation? Uh, Someone should mute the microphone just a second. Okay. So, what is the mechanism of action of how cyclodextrins enhance permeation? So there are two ways by which cyclodextrin improve the bioavailability of drugs. One is that they improve the solubility, and there is a higher portion of active ingredient available made for the body, and which leads to a higher absorption, but not the rate of absorption. It's the volume, the quantity that's higher absorbed. This is not a permeation enhancing effect. It leads to higher blood levels, but this is not true permeation enhancing effect. Cyclodextrins can enhance the permeation through certain biological membranes via interacting with lipophilic components of the membrane, typically cholesterol or fatty acids, improving the fluidity of the membrane temporarily. So this is not a permanent damage. And Why improving this fluidity, the passive transport rates can increase. So this happens. That's true. What is needed for this to happen? To enable this phenomenon, we need a fairly high concentration of cyclodextrin on the surface of the target membrane. And this is given with some formulations, like the nasal spray that we mentioned. Of course, when you use it, you administer all the formulation to a fairly uh, small target area, and there is a high local concentration on the membrane of the cyclodextrin. Or if you apply a topical solution on a cream or a cream on your skin, this obviously happens, but when you swallow a tablet or a capsule, which dissolves in the entire stomach or the long gastrointestinal system, this kind of local high density cyclodextrin concentration is not really happening, or not always happening unless your formulation has some mucoadhesive effects or something like that. So if you want permeation enhancement, you have to design a formulation so that there is a high local concentration of the cyclodextrin, which can be achieved, of course, but this is not natural uh, for the cyclodextrins to bind to the membrane. So that's about permeation enhancing effect and how it can be used with cyclodextrins. About taste masking, so the taste masking effect of cyclodextrins is inevitable. So it's there. They can mask taste, they can mask odors, they can encapsulate compounds of these natures. The mechanism of action of the taste masking is a little bit debated, and it seemed to have some peculiarities compared to other formulations because it was never unambiguously concluded if what is happening. If the cyclodextrin is encapsulating the foul tasting ingredient, and that's how the taste masking occurs, or if the cyclodextrin is reacting with the taste buds, kind of desensitizing them, and that's how the taste masking happens, or the combination of both. What led to the second assumption was that when you develop a formulation with cyclodextrins, usually you have to use the cyclodextrin in an excess. So this it's never an equimolar ratio, or rarely an equimolar ratio between the active ingredient and the cyclodextrin. Usually you need more cyclodextrin so that you have the desired effect. With the taste masking, usually you can also achieve the taste masking if the cyclodextrin is in the minority, so sub-equimolar, which would mean that there are free active ingredients and the full tasting ingredients, but still the taste can be masked. Uh, but in any case, taste masking is there and it happens. So, how to make a cyclodextrin complex? Why is it important to make a cyclodextrin complex? In this very short video, we compare three scenarios. First one, we just put and try to make a solution of the active ingredient. The second one, we take the active ingredient, we take the cyclodextrin, do not form a complex, just mix them together physically, like homogenizing and then put that into solution. And the third one is when we actually made the complex before adding it to the water. So what you can see that in the first case, there is technically no wettability and almost no dissolution. In the second uh, composition, the cyclodextrin improves a lot the wettability of the compound. There is no real complex here, but there is an improved dissolution. And in the third case, both the wettability and the solubility of the compound is dramatically increased even in this few seconds, as you could see. So making sure that there is a complex formed is really critical for the success and to exploit all the advantage the cyclodextrins may offer. How can we make sure that when we did the process, we have the complex? Usually this is done via analyzing the original properties of the active ingredients. What usually happens is that when you put an active ingredient into the cavity of the cyclodextrin, the original properties vanish. We could say, okay, they are masked as long as it's in the cyclodextrin cavity. So you can see the thermogram, the DSC thermogram of the active ingredient completely disappears or changes, and it resembles that of the cyclodextrin. The crystallinity of the compound completely disappears because everything becomes amorphous. And you can also see this in under a microscope if you have a strong one, or more or less all analytical tools are capable of determining if the complex has been formed or if there are free parts still, so maybe crystalline parts of the active ingredient left in the formulation. Uh, so what can we expect when we are making the complex? Because the cyclodextrin and the active ingredient will be always, very specific. The interaction will be very specific for these two components, so we cannot really generalize among all these properties and cannot really say that by the increasing of the cyclodextrin concentration, it's ensured that the solubility, for instance, would increase. There are type of complexes, these B type of isotherms and B type of complexes, where the complex is not soluble in water at all, the BY type, or the complex has a plateau solubility. So there is a solubility limit until it increases, and then it precipitates out of the solution. But of course, in the majority of the cases, typically with the modified cyclodextrins, what we see is there is a linear or close to linear correlation uh, between the concentration increase of the cyclodextrin and the solubilization effect. Um, in order to make the complex, we have a very wide pool of potential techniques, luckily, how to make the complex. Basically, we can divide these into three main areas. We can create the complex in a liquid phase, we can create the complex in a semi-solid phase, and we can create the complex also in a solid phase. In general, we could say that the complexation efficiency is the best if we use the liquid phase technique. So in this case, we usually achieve either a complete solubilization of the active ingredient or an as close to complete solubilization as possible, and which also means the formation of the inclusion complex, which we can isolate. With the semi-solid and solid techniques, we have to use probably more in-process control testing to make sure that the process was successful and thorough enough. So that we could drive as many actives into the cyclodextrin complex as possible. How do we choose? So these are just a compilation of all the techniques out there. You can see co-precipitation, liquid preparation, co-grinding, kneading, spray drying, freeze drying. What we usually say is that it's always the active ingredient and the final use. These two are the key factors of determining what kind of techniques to use to make the complex. So I don't know, if your active ingredient is moisture sensitive, obviously you cannot really use a technique where you make a common solution with the cyclodextrin, because by the time you get there, your API will degrade. If it's heat sensitive, you cannot use freeze drying, spray drying, sorry. If you want to scale, okay, some of these techniques are not equally scalable for tons, tens of ton quantities. You need the complex in a liquid form. You need it in a solid form. So those are all factors to consider, but again, cyclodextrins are very versatile and flexible, so you can easily pick a technique that's suitable for the purpose. Um, a few words about stability, because that's also something that comes up often, especially with oral formulations. So, cyclodextrins can protect the active ingredient from almost all kinds of external stress factors and forces. So, here you can see just a few examples from the literature: light, heat, oxidation, pH, moisture. Cyclodextrins can really protect the active ingredient as long as they are in the cavity of the cyclodextrin. Um, and this is very important to understand. Because when you form the complex and when you isolate the complex, and let's assume that you have done it properly, the active ingredient is within the cavity of the cyclodextrin. So the cyclodextrin would probably protect the active ingredient. It's also a bit conditional because um, it's not just the formation of the complex, but incorporation of the sensitive part of the molecule into the cavity of the cyclodextrin. That's the prerequisite of the stabilization. But more importantly, the complex has to exist. And when does the complex exist? So if you have a formulation in the solid form, a tablet, a capsule, powder, whatever, the active is in the cyclodextrin cavity. When this formulation gets into use, so you swallow the tablet and the formulation dissolves, and there is a huge dilution in the gastric media, for instance, then uh, there is a shift in the equilibrium towards the dissociation of the complex. So the cyclodextrin will release the active ingredient, obviously, because we want it to release the active ingredient so that it can uh, exert its effect. It would also mean that the production is over. So if you want to protect the active ingredient from light in the formulation, so in the dosage form, the packaging, whatever, this is fine, it will work. If you want to protect your active ingredient from gastric pH, and your formulation dissolves in the gastric media, the cyclodextrin will release the active and it will degrade just as quickly as without the cyclodextrin. To be more precise, probably it will degrade quicker because the active will be solubilized, and unlike without the cyclodextrin, more actives uh, will be subjected to the gastric pH. So it's very critical to understand how the cyclodextrin releases the active ingredient, because the complexation itself is the guarantee of having all these effects that we mentioned. So what are the limitations? There are a few that we have to talk about. Um, So there are two main groups, or maybe three main groups of limitation. The in vivo stabilization I just talked about. So first limitation, maybe to mention, is about the release. We mentioned that cyclodextrins are ideal for compositions where the goal is to have a fast onset formulation. They have an immediate effect because, okay, again, the tablet, the capsule, once dissolved, the equilibrium shifts, cyclodextrin release everything, and we'll have a quick high blood level of the active ingredient. On the other hand, if the goal would be to have a controlled release or an extended release with the cyclodextrin itself, let alone targeted delivery, with the cyclodextrin itself, this is very difficult, can be managed. We'll talk about it later how, but it's difficult. The other issue is about generic development. Of course, a lot of companies are interested in not developing necessarily proprietary formulations, but to make a better or more economic version of existing drugs. In case the original formulation doesn't contain a cyclodextrin, this can be really challenging. Why? Because, as we mentioned, cyclodextrins can influence the solubility, they can influence the bioavailability, the absorption, the permeation, the release profile from the formulation, and all these means that bioequivalence, achieving bioequivalence between a non-cyclodextrin containing and the cyclodextrin containing formulation is extremely difficult. And honestly, I have to say that there are no products on the market where the originator doesn't contain cyclodextrins and the generic formulation does contain cyclodextrins. There are super generics when there is a repurposing of a known drug to have an improved formulation and improved use. But classical generic development with cyclodextrins hasn't been solved with due to these obvious reasons. So, are the cyclodextrins safe? Again, a poll question. I'll stop for a few seconds. So, what do you think is currently the highest approved daily dose of a cyclodextrin? Not in oral, in general, any cyclodextrin, highest approved daily dose. How much cyclodextrin can be administered to a patient today? Guesses? In the chat, please write what do you think is the highest daily dose in grams? 5 gram per kilogram. That would mean 350 grams per person. 2 milligram, 10 gram. Okay, so these vary on a very wide scale. 2 gram per body weight, which would mean over 100 grams. Okay, cyclodextrins are safe, but not that safe. Current approved highest daily dose is with the sulfabutyl beta cyclodextrin parenteral application, and it's 16 grams a day for a person. But for an excipient, this is still a huge amount to administer, of course. With the orals, the limits are somewhat lower. So let's see the orals and how the pharmacokinetics look like. So cyclodextrins have very low oral bioavailability. It's certainly in the single digit percentage or even below that, except for the methylated beta cyclodextrin, but that's not approved for oral applications due to toxicity. So the ones that are approved have very low bioavailability. Cyclodextrins also cannot really cross biological membranes, so they do not get absorbed. If you inject them, they do not cross blood-brain barrier or other types of similar barriers. They can only pass membranes via passive diffusion, and with this very low rate. Here you can see the bioavailability of the few products. Few type of cyclodextrins. Typically, there is no metabolism of the cyclodextrin. Gamma cyclodextrin is digested in the intestine, but the other by bacteria, and the other cyclodextrins are excreted unchanged. When you try to determine the optimal dose of an oral formula or of a cyclodextrin in an oral formulation, there are uh, two official sources that you can rely to. So the EMA has a guideline on safety aspects of cyclodextrins, which I recommend to everyone. And of course, there is some limited information if the FDA's inert ingredient database. These are the two main sources. So what kind of side effects are we facing? The side effects are very similar to that of technically other low digestible carbs like lactose. So there is some diarrhea when those that really high doses, but apart from that, okay, some cecal enlargement in animals. But apart from that, technically we cannot really talk, especially in the approved dosing, any side effects of the cyclodextrins. Interestingly, nor can we talk about any evidence of absorption of them influencing the absorption of other ingredients like vitamins or other nutritions. Data says no carcinogenity, no genotoxicity. They are not teratogenic, embryotoxic, so they are very safe to be used. This table is from the EMA's guideline. So as you can see, for oral formulations, suggested daily doses are around 100, 200 milligrams, except for the beta cyclodextrin, which has a significantly lower dose. Uh, we should also mention for a slide that cyclodextrins can also be used in nutraceuticals, and of course, that usually means oral administration. Here, the pool of derivatives is a bit different because only the unmodified, the native cyclodextrins, alpha, beta, and gamma can be used in nutraceuticals. They're all on the GRAS list. Alpha and gamma are novel foods in Europe, and beta is a food additive. As you can see, similarly to pharma, You can dose alpha and gamma in fairly high amounts, so 6 and 10 grams a day, while beta cyclodextrin has a lower limit. But also, when you develop a formulation with beta, it's not as convenient because beta has a fairly low water solubility. Uh, in general, the use of cyclodextrins in the nutraceutical space is very similar, by the way, to pharmaceutical applications. So it's taste masking, odor masking, improving solubility, stability, and so on. And they also have some prebiotic effect. Just as an interesting remark, there is also a cookbook. So if you want to use cyclodextrin in the kitchen to prepare your foods, it's also possible. This can be sourced fairly easily, and uh, especially alpha cyclodextrin is very useful as it's also an emulsifier. So for creating foams and toppings, it's possible. But in Japan, for instance, there is also some kind of seasoning boosted with cyclodextrins available. A last slide about food applications. Technically, here we can distinguish, and there is also clinical data for certain applications. We can distinguish using loaded cyclodextrins, so where we deliver a complex with the obvious advantages that we have talked so far, or if we administer an empty cyclodextrin, which is more like used as a dietary fiber. And there are also clinical data out there showing that consuming alpha cyclodextrin empty has a lot of health benefits and can boost performance of athletes, improve and stabilize blood sugar levels, blood cholesterol levels, and so on. So it's certainly a nice ingredient on its own as well. Getting back to the regulatory viewpoint of FDA's instructions, unfortunately, in the FDA's inactive ingredient database, there is very limited information, not too many examples, and only two cyclodextrins are mentioned: the native beta cyclodextrin with these low limits, and the hydroxypropyl beta cyclodextrin with an extremely wild limit. This 5 gram a day corresponds to the traconazole product that I brought up before. In the EMA guideline, I already showed you the table. Cyclodextrin suggested doses for cyclodextrins. The highest doses are in the gram range, but there is a complete table that you can search in this EMA guideline if you want to look at what is available and what is not available. So let's move to the last part. What kind of formulations are there on the market? What kind of oral products? Uh, Again, another question. When thinking about developing an oral product with cyclodextrins, what do you think is the main bottleneck? What is the biggest drawback of using cyclodextrins? Again, use the chat. Tell me what you think. We could see that there are 50-ish products on the market, which is a fairly big number, but not a huge number. So, okay, it's obvious that there is something behind why there are not more cyclodextrin products on the market. Safety, okay, we said that they are pretty safe. You can dose grams a day, it's not a problem. Time to make the complex, it's not really long. Of course, you have to make it, but the benefits probably outweigh the complexation. Control release rate, very good guess. That's a problem, but that's not the main issue. Safety, stability, biocompatibility, amount of cyclodextrin. Okay, that came from within, so it doesn't count, but that's the good answer. So the problem usually is the mass of the cyclodextrin. And let me explain. So most of the oral formulations contain the active ingredients. Okay, they are highly potent, but a big majority of the formulations contain several milligrams, or in cases even hundreds of milligrams of the active ingredient. Now, the problem is that the active ingredient is usually a small molecule, like 300, 400 daltons. The cyclodextrin is a bigger molecule, so the mass of a cyclodextrin is at least 1000 dalton, but in case of some derivatives, it's even over 2000 dalton. So you have an active ingredient that's 400, and the cyclodextrin, that's 2005-fold uh, uh, improvement or in the favor of the cyclodextrin. It's five-fold larger. If the complex is 1 to 1, this means that for 1 molecule of ibuprofen, we need 1 molecule of cyclodextrin. For 100 milligram of ibuprofen, we need 500 milligrams of cyclodextrin. And in some ibuprofen formulations, we have 400 milligrams of ibuprofen included. So that would mean 2 grams of cyclodextrin, which is already preventive. And on top of that, even if on the theoretical level the complexation is 1 to 1, in reality, to force the ibuprofen into the cavity of the cyclodextrin, you need excess cyclodextrin. So maybe 1 to 2, maybe 1 to 4, which would mean that in the final formulation, the mass of the cyclodextrin is the proportionate mass of the cyclodextrin is much, much higher than that of the active ingredient. So on the formulations that are on the market, the dose of the active ingredient is usually very small. So I would say if it's in the milligram range or tens of milligram range, low tens of milligram range, it's still possible to make a cyclodextrin formulation solid. Oral solution is a different topic. But otherwise, if your dose is high, how to make a formulation that you can still deliver becomes a challenge. But what's there on the market? So the first one was Brexin, so it's a piroxicam formulation. Tablets are dominant in this field, so over 50% of the oral formulations are still tablets, mainly done with beta and hydroxypropyl beta cyclodextrin, in some cases alpha and gamma. There are both classical tablets and orally disintegrating versions. So the piroxicam was the first one. The peculiarity here is that this became, of course, a very popular product. Let's just hide this before we move on. Very popular product, and it became so popular, the piroxicam beta cyclodextrin complex. Here you can see it's also given as the active ingredient, so it's not piroxicam, it's the complex itself. The clatrate, as they call it, is the active ingredient. That this complex you can buy as the complex, so you don't even have to make the complex. You can buy it readily available. This is not very typical for other active ingredients, but here, due to the lot of generics, it became a thing. But you can see there are all kinds of tablets. So there are micro tablets out there. There are chewing tablets, antihistamines. So different type of ingredients, anticontraceptives. So the good thing is that the structure of the cyclodextrin is very flexible. So there is a wide range of active ingredients that you can put into the cyclodextrin. So that helps you in the development, but generally keep in mind that you need a fairly low dose. I wouldn't say always, but you say 0.5 milligrams. This is, I think, 2 micrograms, 20 milligrams. Here there is 200, so okay. There are exceptions, but in general. When making the tablet, there is an interesting cyclodextrin that I would just like to mention. So there is a directly compressible cyclodextrin. It's a hydroxypropyl beta cyclodextrin. No, it's a beta cyclodextrin. Sorry. So it's a directly compressible beta cyclodextrin. It's a product of Rocket, and okay, the advantage is that it was engineered so that you can combine it in its solid phase, so you can create a solid phase complex with the active ingredients and directly compress it. Also, otherwise, the complexes can be tuned to be directly compressible. The second most popular application is capsules, same range of cyclodextrin used. Here, of course, the development is it's even easier because most of the complexes are isolated as powder form, so you can just mix them with other ingredients. If you wish, fill into the capsule the free-flowing powders and deliver as they are. The range of actives are usually very similar. In cases where you need to use high volumes of cyclodextrins, one possible solution for the problem is to make an oral solution, because in this case you can dose much higher amounts of the cyclodextrin. And uh, Here you can see that also this was practically important for pediatric formulations, where the capsule and the tablet formation didn't was not really realistic. The very famous example here is the traconazole formulation that I already mentioned, that has this 8 gram of cyclodextrin as a daily dose. It's also particularly famous because this is the product where the solubility improvement aided with the cyclodextrin is the highest. So it was advertised that itraconazole is less soluble in water than marble, and with the help of the cyclodextrin, you could still make a 10 milligram per ml solution. So this was a 10 million fold improvement in the solubility. And this is also the product where I mentioned that with the sulfabutyl beta cyclodextrin, there is already an active in the market as an oral solution. It's Novartis trametinib, what is on the market as an oral solution. That's the first product with the sulfabutyl beta cyclodextrin. And beyond these, there are all kinds of formulations that you can purchase. I was just at Vita Foods the other week, and I saw cyclodextrin-based gummies. There are chewables, tablets. You can create films, technically anything. Cyclodextrins are pretty much compatible with any kind of formulation. So syrups, mouthwashes, sublingual formulations, chocolate bars, technically anything is possible with cyclodextrins from a technical perspective, and some products are out there on the market. So a question, when we develop a product and we see that cyclodextrin increases the performance in vitro, will it mean that it also increases the performance in vivo? So can we expect that bioavailability will be similarly increased? What do you think? I think this is the last poll. Yes, yes. Increases bioavailability. Okay, let's see. So, usually yes, but not always. And let me explain why it happens. So typically, what we see is that ideally we create a formulation and we see that we increase the cyclodextrin concentration, which would mean that the solubilization effect of the cyclodextrin also increases in vitro. And usually this indeed translates, as you can see here in the example of ibuprofen, the cyclodextrin-based formulations indeed improves the plasma concentration of the active ingredient. So it's a good thing to use. But this is not always what's happening, and this is a counterexample, hydrocortisone, that in the phase solubility study, it was seen that with the increase of the cyclodextrin, there is a linear increase in the cortisol solubility. But when they checked the permeation, it was realized that until a certain point, it increases the permeation, but after a certain point, it prevents the permeation. And this can also happen in vivo, depending on the circumstances again. But imagine that there is a complex you deliver, and the cyclodextrin releases the active ingredient. And after a point, there are all these anti-cyclodextrins, and there are just a few active ingredients there. And the cyclodextrin can potentially recapture the active ingredient if there is a huge excess of the cyclodextrin, if we went too far on the concentration. And as long as it's in the cavity, it cannot get absorbed. So the cyclodextrin has to release it. So if the complex is too strong, for instance, and the release from the cavity is not happening instantly, then we can see that high cyclodextrin concentrations can indeed potentially prevent the permeation of the active, although this happens rarely, I must say. So now I think we tackled this one, so it's a bit theoretical question. So what we cannot achieve with cyclodextrins, there are a few things, but already mentioned, it's extended release, in vivo stabilization, targeting, delivering large molecules, subequimolar formulation, and so on. Let me show you a few examples how to overcome these difficulties with the help of cyclodextrin. So although the cyclodextrin itself releases the active ingredient very quickly, usually from its cavity, it's also true that it can be combined with other drug delivery systems which can solve the problem. So the best solution, at least currently, I wouldn't say the best, the simplest solution currently to overcome these difficulties is to combine cyclodextrins with other drug delivery tools that are capable of this stuff, the targeting, the extended release, the controlled release, whatever is needed. So you can make the complex and incorporate the complex into a matrix that will provide a sustained release. And this works beautifully. So let me just show you uh, the example of the dissolution profile, how you can change it with the help of such technologies. So without the cyclodextrin, this is how the dissolution profile looks like. If you create a complex, you can see, boom, immediate dissolution. Everything gets dissolved within minutes. And if you incorporate the cyclodextrin into a matrix, and you have a lot of possibilities for that, you can have this nice extended release over the course of hours. And here you can see that we did the same studies with different excipients and active ingredients, and it works beautifully. What else? Anything that can modify the onset. Nanofibers. You can create nanofibers with the cyclodextrins, electrospinning, or other technologies, and that provides an even faster onset if needed. So I don't know if you want to develop a film, for instance, uh, or a okay, I forgot the name, how it's called. So a solid or a formulation that dissolves on the tip of your tongue as soon as you touch it. Liposome combinations also possible to make the cyclodextrin complex and put it in the middle of the liposome so that you can combine the effect of the two drug delivery systems. And I'm not really going into further details, but almost any kind of solutions exist and combination exists like that. I must say that none of these combinations are marketed at least as far as I know, but hopefully you can correct me if that's not true. Um, but all are technically pretty much feasible. So that would be the end of the story. I hope that we'll still have a few minutes. Yeah, we have about 10 minutes for questions. But generally, this is the story of oral formulations. As you can see, cyclodextrins have a lot of possibilities in this field, a lot of different formulations that you can think of, a lot of different actives that you can think of. Safety is not really an issue with the cyclodextrins, but the mass of the cyclodextrin is an issue. Be aware of the bioequivalence drawbacks. So when thinking about generic development, be cautious and think twice if cyclodextrins. But if you want something that has a fast onset, they may be the go-to solution for you. And yeah, as I mentioned, I expect to have several novel applications and different release profile formulations containing cyclodextrins emerge in the future, of course, with the combination of different technologies. So, this is the end of my speaking, and it's your turn to raise your questions in the chat box. Um, I'll scroll a little bit before to see if you raised any questions so far. You have been super active, which I really appreciate. It's always good to have interaction, even if we cannot speak all at once. Oh, South Africa, nice. So which type of complex is the cyclodextrin usually forming with the cholesterol 1 to 1 or 1 to 2? Depends on the cyclodextrin. So with the beta cyclodextrin, with the beta cyclodextrin, it's a 1 to 1 complex. With the hydroxypropyl beta cyclodextrin, as far as I can remember, it's a mixture of 1 to 1 and 1 to 2 complexes. So in this case, in some cases, there are two cyclodextrins against the cholesterol, and in some cases, it's 1 to 1, but it's cyclodextrin dependent. What is the limit of concentration of cyclodextrin, specifically beta cyclodextrin, that can be used in the formulation? So according to the EMA document, it's fairly low. I cannot recall from the top of my head. It's below 100 milligrams, I think. But if you just type the EMA cyclodextrin safety document, it will tell you exactly what is the maximum daily dose, what is permitted, and what is possible. Okay. Okay. What is the best method to evaluate the biodispensability of essential oils complexed in beta cyclodextrin in an oral formulation? So, biodispensability, that's a strange question. So, I guess the question here refers to the fact that essential oils are of composite nature. Um, so it's possible to make complexes or products based on composite materials like essential oils, and you can make a powder form of the oil, or you can create a water-soluble form of the oil. Here, of course, what we're dealing with is that there are various components in the oil, and obviously the cyclodextrin would prefer some of these components more and other components less. So the complexation efficacy would be different for all the components that are there. Um, Here, in this case, obviously, you cannot really draw one single conclusion how much the bioavailability improved. I would suggest to pick one or two of the major components and follow those. So if you want to test the bioavailability, you have to use biological samples, so about blood samples to track them. How much it improves the solubility is one thing, but it's not in direct correlation necessarily uh, with the bioavailability. Usually what we see is that the solubility improvement is more dramatic than the actual bioavailability improvement. So no, for instance, if we see 100-fold improvement in the solubility, we see, I don't know, a 10-fold improvement in the bioavailability or so. Just an example, it's also compound dependent. I would suggest to pick one, two, three major components and track those in the system. Any suggestions for peptides? Well, it depends on the purpose and the type of the peptide. So there are some formulations for cyclodextrins and peptides. There are two parenteral formulations, so water insoluble peptides where the cyclodextrin is used for solubilization, anti-cancer drugs, both, I think. And there is one formulation which I also showed from Eli Lilly, the intranasal glucagon, where the cyclodextrin is a permeation enhancer. In general, if the purpose is an oral delivery of the peptide, and the goal of using cyclodextrins would be to prevent from the pH in the stomach. With that application, we don't have very good results. As I said, the cyclodextrin will release the peptide and it will degrade anyway. But if it's solubilization, what you want to achieve, it's certainly possible. Yeah, I really appreciate the kind words. Uh, can we have the PowerPoint? Yeah, I didn't mention it, but since you are registered for the event, we'll put you have a follow-up email to your address, and we'll send over the recording or the slides of the webinar. Is it possible that the cyclodextrin decreases the solubility? Yeah, in a sense, it's possible, although it rarely happens. So this is typical when the complex that is formed between the cyclodextrin and the active ingredient is insoluble. There are cases like that. For instance, the beta cyclodextrin, the reason for the thing that the native beta cyclodextrin is toxic parenterally is that it forms an insoluble complex with cholesterol, which is causing the toxic side effects, the hemolysis and the nephrotoxicity. And with native cyclodextrins, we see that there is, I wouldn't say it's very often, but there are cases where the complex itself is water insoluble. And that can be that the complex is even less soluble than the drug itself. But apart from that, I would say it's very rare. And if you use derivatized cyclodextrins like the hydroxypropyl beta or the sulfabutyl, it's impossible that they'll decrease the solubility. I would rather say that they will definitely increase the solubility. The extent of solubility improvement is not really predictable, but they'll improve it anyway. Any regulatory changes expected in the future? Well, who knows? So there could be, I think maybe mainly I'm really expecting in two areas. One is that, as you could see, for pharmaceuticals, you can use orally more cyclodextrins than for nutraceuticals. I expect that more cyclodextrins currently only used in the pharma will penetrate the nutraceutical field because they are much more powerful excipients and solubilizers, and they are also safer. So there is no way of keeping them away from the nutraceutical field. So this is certainly one. Um, there is also another topic which is interesting. So some cyclodextrins that we talked about today, particularly the hydroxypropyl beta cyclodextrin, uh, show some properties as active ingredients. So it's not really considered as an inactive excipient. It certainly has some functional properties. And as we mentioned, cyclodextrins do not only interact with the active ingredients, they do interact with cell membranes and internal molecules. So I think safety limits would probably be a bit more refined in the future. I don't really expect banning or completely preventing the use of current cyclodextrins from any formulations because there's a lot of evidence for their usefulness and safety, but fine-tuning the current dosing regimen or the extent of dosing, for instance, maybe in case of chronic treatments that I can expect in the future. Um, Couldn't there be an exchange of complex active ingredients with other substances that are, for example, ingested with food? For instance, vitamin E for fat-soluble active ingredients. So theoretically, this is possible. As I said, current evidence says that this is not really happening. So if you consume cyclodextrins, even empty cyclodextrins, it will not prevent the absorption of other ingredients in the body. Uh, but that may be because of the concentration. So in order to form a complex between an active ingredient and the cyclodextrin, you really need a fairly high local concentration of the cyclodextrin and the active ingredient both to drive it in the complex. What is happening realistically when you eat, I don't know, when you consume a lot of different things is that they form complexes with the cyclodextrins. They interact with the cyclodextrin, but the complexation is happening on a very quick time scale. So, I don't know, vitamin A goes in and it goes out, and cholesterol goes in and the cholesterol goes out. And there is I don't know, a fatty acid goes in and it goes out. But on a high level, you will not uh, experience any changes because of this unless you really consumed a lot of cyclodextrins or if the guest molecule is present at a very high dose. That is why it could occur, and there are reports for that if you are on a very fatty diet and with your diet you consume alpha cyclodextrins, so you have a fairly high fat soluble components in your stomach at the same time having grams of cyclodextrins in your stomach, cyclodextrins will encapsulate the fats and will prevent their absorption, stabilizing your lipid levels. But with compounds which are present only in very small amounts, at the same time, it's happening, but it's not really affecting the outcome. Any other ways to characterize the interaction between cyclodextrin and active ingredient except for solubility improvement? So any analytical tool that can distinguish between a naked active ingredient and the complex active ingredient is suitable to detect the complexation. This can be HPLC, NMR, ITC, capillary electrophoresis, UV, fluorescence, you name it. With almost every analytical method, the complex will behave somewhat differently than the active ingredient itself. And if that happens, you can show the presence of the complex. Is cyclodextrin helpful in checking the biodegradability? Okay, I'm not sure what this word is. Of curcumin, so we can increase the shelf life. Oh, okay, of curcumin. Dr. Johan, an old friend. So the shelf life of curcumin can be increased if by shelf life you mean storage time of curcumin. So stabilization of the curcumin in a formulation. That's certainly possible with cyclodextrin. They can do that. If you want to increase the half-life of the curcumin within the body or the stability of the curcumin within the body with the help of cyclodextrin, probably that will not happen because the complex, as we discussed, is not really existing in the body anymore. How effective are cyclodextrins at trapping and masking unwanted volatile compounds in smoke or vapor when used in aqueous solution? What factors influence their ability to purify or improve the taste of smoke passing through cyclodextrin containing liquid? So this is certainly possible. I don't really know what is the exact formulation or challenge you have in mind, but okay, not exactly what you asked for, but so cyclodextrin-based air filters or filters that can remove unwanted volatile compounds from air have been developed and they are completely possible. If this is in water, so if you transfer the air, the smoke through a liquid, and the liquid has a high concentration of the cyclodextrins, and the technology allows their mixing rather efficiently, it's possible. So cyclodextrin can capture volatile components pretty permanently. Technologically, it's feasible, but to answer specifically the question, it's a bit too vague to understand. Thank you for the compliments. The nitrosamine issue of the cyclodextrins, possible, but not really question. So, cyclodextrins are not nitrogen-containing molecules, and usually the process of creating the cyclodextrins doesn't contain any sources of nitrates. There are cases where resins are used for the purification of cyclodextrins during the production, which can be a source of nitrates. And in these cases, the question is relevant and should be tested, but it's technology dependent how the cyclodextrins are made, and it's something that can be completely avoided if the technology is well planned. From Charbel, another friend, can the modified cyclodextrins such as methylated improve the solubility of drugs, oils, for instance, to encapsulate very low soluble drugs in slow capsules? Um, so methylated cyclodextrin is not approved for orals, although technically what you ask is possible, but from a regulatory perspective, it's not suggested. But hydroxypropyl beta cyclodextrin would be probably a fairly good fit for what you said. And yeah, to put such compounds in soft capsules, absolutely possible with cyclodextrins and essential oils. Okay, and we are at the end of the questions. Also the end of the time, a little bit exceeded, but I'm always into a good conversation, so I really much appreciate all the questions that you raised. This is the best part of the talk, of course, when we talk about real world questions. Thank you everyone for being with me today. I enjoyed it a lot. I hope you could provide some useful information for you. If there is anything that's within you or any questions that we not couldn't tackle today, just drop us a line. We are really happy to help. Thank you and have a good day, everyone. Bye bye.